Hi, this is Khalil Golivala. Welcome to another episode of the BIPOC Manager Podcast. In today's episode, I'm super excited to have back with us Basil Malik. Basil Malik is a CRM thought leader. He's currently CRM practice director at Net at Work LLC, former CRM practice leader at Blightco, previously a software selection advisors based out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Now, one of the reason why I got Basil here again is to talk about identities. Now, a lot of us kind of think of sort of identities of persona, like a work identity persona, a personal life identity persona. But what about Basil? He's sort of one person, both spaces. So, Basil, can you walk us through a bit more sort of identities in these different spheres and how you navigate them, please?
So it's good to be back. The interesting thing about identity is people do really operate from two different planes. The plane in which they exist from their personal lives, their thoughts, their beliefs, their values, and then from a business perspective, they've got their professional self that shows up to work every day. They've got their barriers, they've got their, or sorry, boundaries is probably a better word. They've got very specific boundaries that they adhere to, and that's pretty much it. Where I've found a lot of success, and I feel like this is what allows me to have really candid and transparent conversations with people, especially in the world of CRM. You have to connect with them on the personal level so that you can lean into the conversations about their pain. From a personal and professional level, I struggled to be what I would call my version of success until I aligned my personal self with my professional self. So I use the phrase I show up with my whole ass self, which is somewhat of a play on where someone said, "Oh, you're half-assing something." Well, no, I whole ass it or I don't ass it at all. But with the personal and the professional life, I felt like I became wildly successful. It felt like overnight, but realistically, it was a very long journey. But I had to align being able to show up as one person. Once I was able to show up with one person, it didn't matter whether I was having a conversation with my wife or my friends. If they started talking about something where principles of business in the way that I think from a business perspective would apply, I didn't have to hesitate. I didn't have to shift mentalities of how I would approach it. It was just a seamless transition. On the flip side of that, from a business perspective, if someone is having a hard time, it's a lot easier to connect with them from a personal perspective because you're not necessarily censoring yourself from allowing that side of you to actually show up and provide some level of care and empathy with that other individual. So there's merits of both, but aligning both into one person so that you can just operate seamlessly in either sphere. I feel like that was truly a pivotal moment for me as a professional as well as an individual.
Yeah. Something that as you're talking, what it kind of occurred to me was I sort of had this notion of, and this is going back to, I guess, old times, but, people would be defined by the work they did, like a smith or a carpenter. But I don't think it was almost there, but it's almost like those two worlds were one world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the office, the market, the shop was inside the home.
Mm-hmm.
You trained everybody was part of the kind of the business and family. That line was a porous line, and maybe that distinction is more a modern day distinction.
Mm-hmm. I think it is. The interesting thing is, I actually don't believe in my legacy being in the things that I leave behind. It's the feelings that I created along the way. So when I look at the projects that I've done, at the end of it, there's an outcome, and people feel a certain way about an outcome. That is the legacy that I'm leaving behind because they're not going to remember me necessarily for everything else that I did. They're going to remember what I did for them and how that thing made them feel. So if I work a late night one night just to make sure that I get a project done and I make sure that I let the person know that, hey, I gave everything I've got to make this outcome come to pass, they're going to be much more appreciative of it. They're going to remember how they felt in that moment. And very much on the personal side as well, people aren't going to remember you for your wealth or the things that you had. That's more of a point in time remembrance or a memory. They're going to remember you for how you made them feel. And I feel like when we're looking at and even the comparison of works of art and things of that nature, art, music, sculptures, paintings, all these things inspire feelings. That's what makes them so deeply impactful. Is whenever you're looking at something, it really sets something off. Or if you hear a certain song, or the way that someone is presenting a speech, even the inflection and how they make you feel, that's what's truly memorable. uh, and when I leave this world, that's what I want to be remembered for. I want to be remembered for all the impacts that I had, all of the feelings that I created, hopefully much more positive than negative. And that's really what I would consider uh, what I want to be remembered for.
Yeah. Basil, something there you're talking about, and this is it's such a beautiful idea. So, the feelings you want to leave people with, the positive feelings, right? But you also talk about this point in time where you were able to kind of be the same person, no matter if you're in business or private. Are you able to talk about maybe the differences between the type of feelings you were able to give people, let's call it before you kind of were this one cohesive self versus after? Is there a difference in the kind of feelings you would you would provide people that's for it?
I absolutely believe that the answer to that is yes. There's a drastic difference, and it might not seem so on our side. From our side, we see someone being appreciative, or maybe a little bit more appreciative, but on their end, the sincerity behind the words are very different. Whenever I was able to align my personal and professional self into one person, I feel like the conversations had much more depth to them. It wasn't superficial, it wasn't shallow in any way, shape, or form. It was truly, you're able to have those deep connections because you're connecting with them more personally. You're sharing more of your personal self with them. They're going to share more of their personal self with you. So that allows you to have much more enriched conversations. When you're able to have much more enriched conversations, and again, this is either personal or professional, when you get to that depth, you unlock trust. And when you unlock trust, that means people are going to be a much more candid. They're going to be a lot more transparent with how they're feeling, even if they're a little bit more fearful of exposing those elements of themselves to you. Because you've built that level of trust, they feel like they've got a safe space to air things that they otherwise wouldn't. So when you're able to connect with people at that depth, the outcomes you're able to create by extension also have that much more depth. I would even say exponential depth by comparison, because you're addressing anxieties, you're addressing fears, you're addressing things that are very visceral feelings by comparison. Whereas we'll help your salespeople sell more, we'll help your customer service people, have better CSAT scores, you'll help your marketers be more efficient. Anyone can do that. Any software can do that. But if you connect with them on a personal level, you're actually addressing the person, the user experience, the customer experience. There's a lot more depth to those things.
Yeah. I love how you mentioned the point about trust. There's I forgot the name correct. It's Stephen Covey who wrote the seven habits of highly effective people. But his son wrote a book called The Speed of Trust, and about how trust was the core of business and life. And I love this one. The thing he said was that when you have trust, you can get 99% of the words wrong, but people will still believe you and work with you. But if they don't have trust, you can get 99% of the words exactly right, and it still won't work out.
Yep, yep, absolutely. You're creating a safety net. If people feel like there's a safety net with you, then or if there's that element of trust, there's grace. Where there's trust, there's grace. And when you've got grace, you can have a little bit more latitude when it comes to failing. And maybe you get something wrong, but they'll give you the grace because there is trust. They trust that you will inevitably take the time and the effort to make it right.
Yeah. I think there's something there I want to kind of like focus on a bit more, right? So maybe the question is, so at some point, let's keep it as these two identities, the work and the personal. Do
Mhm.
is it sometimes I guess the question is, why is that maybe most people have these two identities? And any
Mhm.
thoughts to it? Like, is it maybe a misconception, or is it maybe some kind of requirement somewhere? Could you talk a bit about that, please?
I feel like it's somewhat ingrained in us as we're growing up. If you think back to being a kid, how you were at home was one thing, but the second you went out in public, you were expected to behave slightly different. You had to be on better behavior. You had to be more respectful. You had to do all of these things. All these additional boundaries were drawn for you. So therefore, you inherently adapted to that. So you do that enough when as you're growing up, and then by the time you go to high school, the time you go to college, the time you actually get your first real job, or even the crap job that you get waiting tables, that's kind of you paying your dues to get to something that's more in line with what you're passionate about. Not to slam anyone that loves waiting tables by any means, but uh, when when you're able to go through these things, any new environment you enter, you're entering it very much like as a kid going from being inside your home to being outside of your home. And that distinction people expect, I mean, it's a social norm almost, that people expect you to be on more socially acceptable behavior. So whenever you get into the wonderful world of work, it is very much business as usual from that standpoint. And if anything, you're much more ingrained with those habits of not bringing your full personal self to those environments because you've already had so much experience not bringing that whole, or you've been punished for bringing your personal self in some way. So people tend to be a lot more guarded whenever they go into the world of business. And I was one of those people. And I feel like what was missing from my own personal journey was I just didn't feel like I was connecting with people. I didn't feel like I was connecting with them at the depth that I needed to truly get to the answers that I was seeking. As a consultant, the more detail you have, the more awareness you have, therefore the better questions you can ask and the more you can lean on pressure points or things that truly resonate with them. But until I broke through that, it was just like everyone else. I had all these boundaries that I adhered to. They were completely unknown. They were call it like a reflex to a degree, because it had been ingrained as in me as I grew up.
Yeah, some like a muscle memory. Basil, are you able to maybe just like me briefly? I mean, like you said, this is a process took years to kind of get to a point we kind of be the same stuff across these spaces.
Mhm.
Anybody who wants to kind of move towards there, any kind of baby steps they could take? Is there something like simple, low risk they can try out to start on that path?
Oh yeah, I mean this whole journey started whenever I was at Blytheco. That company had a really good culture of transparency, candor. They really encouraged it. So it truly allowed me to unlock a lot of these and somewhat test some of the methods that I'm about to share. One of the first methods was, eventually you'll find someone that you connect with on a professional level. You like them, they seem like they like you. You've got this natural chemistry or synergy between the two people. uh, Take a chance. When the situation makes sense and something about you personally is relevant to what you're talking about from a business perspective, just interject it. I do this thing here lately where when I'm talking about a CRM that I represent, I speak to how it solved a very specific problem for me as a new father. As a new father, as a new dad, it completely removed a lot of the anxieties that both my wife and I had as new parents by being able to track our son's feedings, his bowel movements, his naps, how much we're trying to play with him and engage with him with toys or whatever it might be to help build all those neural pathways. I do that because it's relevant. I'm explaining how customizable that CRM solution is, and I connect it to a personal element. Very similarly, if you've got something or a professional situation where a personal experience has merit or has relevance, interject it into the conversation. And think about the relevance twice. Think about it from a professional perspective of, is what I'm about to say, does it align with the company's culture? If so, great. That means that's a good time to interject a personal note about yourself into the conversation. The other thing is you have to have some sort of uh, call it a North Star, if you will. So my North Star is I grew up with my mom being everything to me. My dad really wasn't in the picture, lacked a father figure my entire life, but my mom was there for me. She was the best single parent I could have ever asked for. She is my North Star. When I think about a situation, whether it's should I do this or shouldn't I do this, or if I take this action, is it the right action? I simply have to ask myself, if I go back and tell my mom the story of what I did and why I did it, would she be proud of me or would she be ashamed of me? And if the answer isn't 100% she would be proud of me, then I don't do it. That is my North Star. So everyone has to have that somewhat North Star guidance on when it makes sense to interject it. So if you're about to share something personal about yourself in the way that you share it, if that North Star reference would be like, oh yeah, great, that's perfect. All right, checkbox number one checked, and then just make sure it's situationally relevant from a business perspective, and it doesn't conflict or add friction from a cultural perspective in the business that you operate in.
Thank you for that, Basil. Before we wrap up the episode, is anything else that you'd like to highlight or mention?
It's a journey. Combining your personal self with your professional self is truly a journey, as with many things. But with this especially, this is something that you should truly take baby steps of baby steps, because until you feel like you've got the proper person that you're opening up with about your personal self and you start getting more comfortable with it, it's going to take time. It took me easily a year for me to truly fully open up and share my truly authentic self with the people that I was working with. And now I feel like I've done that enough times to where it is a reflex. It is a habit of showing up as my full and total authentic self. Yes, I adhere to boundaries, and I'm very mindful of whether or not I'm going to be perceived as an a-hole or if I'm going to be, showing up as the nice guy still. So I would say just treat it as a journey. Rome wasn't built in a day. The habits that you have and the way that you show up didn't materialize overnight. It's going to take time to align those two people to one person, to where you're showing up in both, in all aspects of life as the same person.
Thank you for sharing that, Basil. Thank you for being a guest today.
Thank you very much.